The Journey of Square Peg, Chapter 8, The Evil. This chapter contains graphic violence. Later that day, amid the sombre silence of my shocked and saddened family, all trying desperately to put on a brave face for our oblivious little girl, it was agreed that we should approach the boat. Who knew what we might find there? I did not want to risk my family more than I had to, but still felt compelled to offer assistance in case anyone was still alive. I took with me my pistol, diving knife and a mask and snorkel so that I might get aboard without bringing our barge alongside. We turned our bow to take a route that would put the yacht between us and the suspected base of that criminal patrol, approached cautiously in the lee, and seeing no ladder down to the water up which to climb aboard, decided to run alongside after all. The swell was considerable. It was not easy to manoeuvre, but we drew closer anyway. The hulls bumped loudly for a second. My wife, who was steering our vessel, made an excellent job of it, and I was soon safely aboard, clambering over the wire picket and crouching low on the deck until our barge had sailed a few hundred metres off to await my signal. The clash had left a long scratch on the yacht's soft gunwale and the teak extremity of its deck. In the distance, my daughter, cautious as ever, popped her head up out of our forward hatch, her hair a trailing, bright beacon in the morning sunlight. I was alone. Silence descended upon the sloping deck, broken by the spinning wind turbines and the clink of rigging against the mast. As I squatted, the sound drew my attention to an explanation for the crew's apparent indiscretion with the sail. Damaged and tangled rigging was jammed halfway up the mast, while the boom bounced freely without the tether of any kicking strap. It looked like an intractable mess not easily fixed. Perhaps he had planned to work on it today. Too late. Tuning in, I could almost smell the metallic tang of stainless steel and money. The mainsail fluttered urgently. Determined to approach this search with care, I made my way cautiously through the unfamiliar cockpit, passing suspicious dark patches on the deck. Without calling out, and having waited for the bilge pumps to finish their cycle first, I slipped below, taking in the scene that met me down the centre of my white-dotted pistol sight. Amid eerie calm, the galley floor was littered with papers, maps, kitchen implements. All was spattered with blood. The gas oven sat not quite plumb on its gimbal mounts, as if something were unbalancing it. A dried brown stream fractured from the corner of its closed door. The floor vibrated for a moment under my feet as the pumps ran again. The aroma of a stranger's life aboard, even in these stately proportions, was pungent to me, used as I was to the scent of only my clan. The sickly stench of blood did not reach my nostrils until I had entered the state quarters at the stern. The once luxurious materials that conspired to form its interior bore the mark of a year abroad. And then I pushed on the walnut veneered cabin door. All sense of normality was gone. For there, in that private space, a scene unsurpassed in wickedness and psychopathy met my gaze. Aghast, I turned, sucking in a deep breath, trying to compose myself. That which was there would have to wait. Accompanied by an army of demons at my spine, I forced myself to sweep the rest of the vessel for threats. My heart was pumping hard now, breath bellowing in fight or flight excitement. Having briskly searched her over in the pounding silence and with the girl still unaccounted for, I returned to the state cabin. Perhaps she was in the ensuite or hiding somewhere. I could only hope that she had not witnessed the horror there. The bilge pumps ran again. Entering the room, it became clear to me how the sadistic events must have played out. Strangely dehumanized, a man, or so I supposed from what part of his clothes was neither drenched in blood nor missing entirely, was prone on the bed, kneeling wide with his lower half naked. A thin trickle of blood traced the backs of his thighs. His hands were tied with rope behind his back, blue beyond the vicious tourniquet. His pale torso was bowed forward into the bed, as if his head were buried deep in the mattress. I furrowed my brow. It was unreal, odd. Then it dawned on me that the head was not buried, it was missing. Staring up from the floor at the foot of this macabre altar was a woman, her eyes wide open in death, body bruised and punctured with countless wounds. Her clothes were torn from her body, her thighs naked, blood-smeared. A lake of crimson jelly framed her damaged body, some falling down a tiny ragged hole in the floor where a bullet had passed through. There was a blackened gunshot wound in her naked chest too. I gagged, tasting the cloying air as I tried to avoid breathing through my nose. A blizzard of blood spatters flecked the dreadful scene. Catching my breath at last, shooting glances in every direction as I moved, I made my way past these unfortunate souls to check the bathroom for the young girl. Slipping slightly as I moved, I caught the heel of one boot in the horrid pool. The bathroom was empty. I called out in vain and did not try again. Instinct told me I was alone. There was no one that I could rescue, no salvaging a positive from this sad affair. Disappointment at the hopelessness of their demise began to be replaced in my heart. Outrage and anger began to swell instead. In my mind, the scene entangled with so many others that formed the dossier of injustice I had collated during a lifetime of experiencing the results of human cruelty. By what right? What drove these devils to do this? I gripped my teeth in anger, felt the swell in my chest, and as soon as it began, pragmatism reined it in. This was not helpful. Anger risking dangerous distraction. For anger, like pain, is a closing window. Still haunted by the spectres there, I tried to think clearly, to regain my composure. Drawing on a well-drilled coping strategy, I quelled the rising tide in me, and with a deep breath focused. There was nothing to be done for them. I had now to think of my family. Our food and fuel supplies were dwindling. If we were to starve to death, it would not be with a longing that I had scavenged from this boat properly as I had all the others, no matter what sad history it contained. But with its sail aloft, it was a magnet to opportunists. It was listing too, as water trickled into the hull. Who knew how long I had? Paying no heed to damage or waste, I began to raid the lockers and cupboards with speed. I searched the cabinets for medication, finding only glycerol trinitrate spray and a packet of condoms, both of which I pocketed. I then set about searching, as methodically as possible, the rest of the boat. As thorough as I tried to be, there was too much ground to cover and no time to dig deep. The murderous animals had clearly been through everything themselves. I found nothing of worth. Normally, I would salvage wood for our fires, but this was too risky to strip the combustibles. Though desperate to leave, I couldn't help thinking I could not afford to go empty-handed. In hindsight, I wonder if the price paid for that delay was worth it. Thinking through the fog of emotions, I wondered, where would I keep valuable resources on such a large boat? The only place I hadn't accessed, apart from the deck lockers, which had all been wide open when I boarded, was the considerable plinth on which the master's bed perched. Determined to check all possible places, I had no choice but to return to the horror of that stateroom. My body shook in fear and disgust. Guilty pangs stabbed at my repulsion. They had been ordinary people, living life the best way they could. Their bodies should not incite such disgust. They deserved so much more, but throwing towels over both the victims, not wanting to touch the headless corpse, I heaved to tip the mattress, aided by the listing hull. Dislodged, the man tumbled over and thudded down solidly to lie in a fetal position on top of his late wife. "I'm sorry," I muttered, as the mattress closed in on top of them. Her hand, wedged against the wall, strained out from beneath the rubble, a frozen claw reaching for the door her daughter must have left by. The plinth, now fully revealed, showed two hand holes set back from a central line cutting the rich wood from one end to the other. I warily pulled one, trying to stay out of the possible trajectory of any booby traps. The shelf of wood groaned on buckled hinges, revealing a suitcase and a separate box of shotgun cartridges. In the void below, there was no weapon anywhere. I opened the case and, breathing shallow, found it to be empty save for two small bars of gold, a tiny jewellery box, and several thick wads of sterling and dollar bills. At any other time in my life, to have come into such possessions would have elicited huge excitement, but here they were as defunct as their owners. Thinking of my daughter, I stuffed the wads and gold in my dry bag. The money would serve for firelighting, and might even be interesting for my daughter, to help her imagine England and America when we told the stories of our previous lives that she loved so much. They could be a connection with the world that once was. As for the gold, well, it is hard even in such circumstances where burdensome riches no longer serve a useful purpose to ignore such a lure. I would find a use for them. I needed heavy weights for some nets I'd salvaged. They might do the job nicely. I prized open the jewellery box, feeling guilty for the intrusion. Within was a single photograph of a father tightly hugging a young girl with long blonde hair and freckles. They smiled broadly, captured together, full of love and life. I sighed again, shaking my head. How could those bastards be so cruel, so devoid of mercy or feeling? As I rose, the woman's hand beckoned, and having placed the picture in her cold grasp, I made my way to the galley. I had just decided that it wasn't worth risking any more time aboard when it dawned on me that there might be some useful kitchen items I could take. Working through the cupboards, I quickly filled my bag with what dry foods I could find. I sealed the bag with a little air to aid buoyancy, then looked down at the oven. Perhaps there were cooking trays or something hidden in there. I crouched down for a better look, curious at the marks below the door, and with a bolt of shock fell backwards, hitting my head on the stem of the table opposite. Bile rose in my mouth. I pulled myself to my feet, retching at the lifeless eyes of the captain staring at me through the glass door. Clutching my head, my heart pounding, vision swimming, shocked and nauseous, I made my way up to the light and air of the deck. I had to get off. Small bloody footprints stained the steps. Grimacing at the bump on my head, as my head rose above the canopy, signs of further danger jerked me back to lucidity. To my surprise, our boat was heading at full speed directly towards the yacht, its bow ramming the crests of the waves as it made sharp course corrections to sweep alongside. My son stood on the back corner of the barge's cabin, was waving and reaching out a hand to help me aboard. "It's them!" he cried, in reply to my shocked look. A strong hand gripped mine, and I leapt aboard, avoiding the grinding surfaces of the two hulls as they came into contact beneath my heels. Grabbing the wheelhouse handrail, I turned my head to see, at some distance still, a low white shape cutting steadily through the water towards us. It was using the yacht, which lay between us, to provide cover for its approach. My son stared, momentarily transfixed, at the bloody heel print I left on our deck. "Son, switch on," I cried. "I'm not hurt." "What was on the boat?" he asked, looking petrified now. "There's no time," I replied, and then shouted at Helen through the glass of the wheelhouse. "Run for the coast, east to the coast." Then urgently, and clearly to snap him too, I ordered Michael, "Son, hide your sister and stay with her. Take my knife." His mouth open and wordless, he staggered towards the door. Legs gangling awkwardly, he stumbled below. I could hear the crashing of a locker's contents hitting the floor underneath, urgent instructions given in a desperate voice. Having turned the barge and opened up the throttle, my Helen looked back at me from the steering wheel. She held my eye pleadingly through the window. I don't know what to do, I shouted through the glass, panicked. I'll raise the sail, but if they come after us, we can't outrun them. We have to try, she cried, tears running down her cheeks as she turned to stare at the sea ahead. Hurry, she shouted, correcting our direction and willing the boat faster. As I grabbed the mainsail cover, it dawned on me that this wouldn't work. I looked again at the dinghy, closing the distance with what seemed to be supernatural speed. I wanted to raise the sail to put these beasts well behind us, but with the men gaining on us even at our full engine speed, and with the time it would take to get the sail aloft, it was now useless to try. Running on instinct, my mind raced for a solution. By now they had motored straight past the yacht, heading directly for us just a few hundred yards away. I swallowed, full of black realization, and in this terrible moment an idea formed. Calculations raced through my mind. I would be outnumbered, but I had an advantage. I knew my vessel, and I could predict their behaviour. Stop! I shouted over the engine noise. Comply with them. You have to comply with them. Kill the engine and hide the key in the rice jar. Then lock yourself in the forward cabin with the kids. What are you talking about? She cried in surprise. She looked at me as if I was mad. What do you mean? We can't stop. We have to try to get away, she screamed. We can't get away. We have to fight. What? What are you going to do? She shrieked. What was I going to do? My idea seemed crazier with every passing moment as the armed men surged into view. I could not engage them with the pistol as they approached. A firefight would risk all of us being hurt in the returning fire. Glancing back, I entered the wheelhouse. Stop the boat, I said quietly, grasping Helen's wrist. I have to take them by surprise. I'm not hiding, I just have to get some advantage. There would be too many of them to take directly. Please trust me. And with that, against her struggles to prevent me, I turned off the ignition myself, shouted at Helen and shoved the key in the jar. Go, I urged her. She eyed the jar with mutinous looks, but capitulated as I began to push her, rushing her below. With the men in the dinghy now so close I could have made out the expressions on their faces through the porthole glass, I followed her to the forward cabin to check that my children were well hidden. Opening the long underseat locker door, I found my son using his body to protect Rose, who lay crammed in behind him up against the cold inner surface of the hull. She was whimpering. Son, I shouted, whatever happens, whatever, don't come out of there until hours after you think it's clear. I shoved a bottle of water through the door to my cowering children. The floor pitched and rolled ever more violently as the wind whistled through the rigging beneath the leaden sky. Baby, I added, with as much confidence as I could muster, don't make a sound, okay? Some bad men are coming, and we can't let them find us. Stay with your brother. I love you. To cover them, I shoved in some of the items my son had dislodged onto the floor and closed the door on their petrified faces, sealing them there in the darkness. I kicked the debris of our stores against the locker door to conceal their hiding place better and, stopping a moment to split the pack of condoms, slipped one over the barrel of the G19 before climbing up through the hatch onto the foredeck. There I crouched, obscured by the wheelhouse from our pursuers. A cold rain began to fall. Waiting until our boat had drifted to a stop, I dived off the bow into the freezing water and stayed below the surface, breathing through the snorkel I had still with me from the raid. My heart pounding, I rested a hand on the steel hull to feel for vibrations and hold at bay the rising and falling bow. I kicked my legs hard to stay afloat and gripped the pistol around the barrel in an attempt to keep the condoms sealed around it. Anything to limit water ingress. Suspended there below the surface, time slowed beyond all measure. I was a crocodile, waiting below the waterline. Only the sound of the outboard on the dinghy as it circled our barge told me that the moment of truth was near. I tried to control my breathing through the snorkel, hoping they would not spot its black tip jutting above the surface of the water as they passed. In moments they pulled alongside and boarded, three murky figures clambering onto the high deck. Staying together, they slid open the wheelhouse door, the squealing of the casters echoing through the water. Deep, clomping footsteps came too as they descended below, and then there was muffled shouting, banging on the thin locked door to the cabin where my family hid. Sharp cracks were carried to my ears. Perhaps it was broken through. In the moment of their distraction, I took a breath and swam rapidly under the hull to the stern. I surfaced as quickly and quietly as I could, letting out my breath slowly in case a sentry lurked on deck. The snorkel slipped from my mouth and sank beyond sight. Coursing with adrenaline, I climbed like a rat up the rope that was always left dangling over the side, just in case. With huge effort, I reached the deck rail. My wet elbows slipped as I heaved myself over, resisting the urge to crash onto the deck. I was desperate to be quiet. A scream and laughter emitted from below. My heart beat out of my chest. Water splashed noisily from my soaked clothes, the drips resounding like gunshots. Led by predatory instinct, I crept forward, unsheathing the barrel of the pistol as I held it before me. My feet knew every inch of the deck, avoiding the places where the boards creaked. The wildly bucking boat had no effect on the muzzle of my gun. I remained uncannily poised. In their self-confidence and murderous intent, they did not guard their route into the boat, leaving the doors and hatches open to my approach. Making my way below, my feet leaving wet prints on the painted decks, I could hear them down the corridor beyond our galley. Overcoming a huge desire to charge in and fight, I eased my way down the steps, each footstep placed with immaculate care, the sounds hidden by the rising wind and rain outside and the moaning of the flexing hull. Soon I could see one of them beyond the doorway, standing with his back to me, brandishing an over and under shotgun at my pregnant wife. In his belt was hooked a long braid of hair, a trophy. Another step revealed Helen as she cowered back in the corner furthest from the cabin door. She was clutching a kitchen knife. The corridor reeked of sweat and testosterone. Salt water streamed from my hair, dripping with cymbal crashes on the galley floor. My hands tightened hard on the pistol grip as I surveyed the scene. "Where are they, bitch? Where are they?" one screamed. My head screamed in unison. "On the yacht," she yelled back, "and you stupid bastards just went straight past them." She was defiant as she shielded her belly with her arms. I felt a pang of pride in her, and with it a determination, as cold and resolute as the sea. These animals would not live to hurt my family. As I came level with the wrecked door jamb, the view opened wide enough to expose the backs of all three men in the cabin. They taunted my wife, unaware of my stalking approach behind them. Receiving no answer to his demands, the furthest to the left started to advance towards her. He was laughing as he moved, but her gaze did not go to him. Instead, she stared in desperation past them as I appeared in the doorway, a glance that triggered events which could only have one outcome. I wasted no time in giving my thunderous answer to their interrogation. But in the time it took me to shoot too, the third man, flanked by his slumping dead henchman, had turned, lashing out with a machete in a wide-over arch of his arm. I hesitated in surprise, but as he turned, he slipped on a teddy bear lying at his feet, the loss of posture spoiling his aim just enough that, as I flinched back, the machete's tip glanced my left eyebrow and cheek, narrowly missing my outstretched arms. The steel rendered open the flesh that it touched. I jolted backwards with a cry, falling to the floor as I fired 3 wild shots at him. 2 found their mark. Staring down between my knees as I lay on my back in the doorway, I watched him gaping like a fish, agonal breaths accompanied by the rhythmic drumming of his booted feet on the cabin floor. And as he departed, my own blood stained my vision. I lay in stunned silence, tears welling in my eyes, struggling to control my breathing. Trembling with adrenaline as the salt water dripping from my hair stung in my wounds, I cried their names, and they revealed themselves to me, my dear children, each one wailing in those terrible moments, shaking with shock. Our tears cascaded as we cried, exorcising the terror of facing death. Though we sobbed and embraced, newly formed beings in a virgin, alien world found solace in that way. Helen recoiled from me in the corner of the room, averting her eyes from me as if I were a monster whose existence she could end by denial alone. Rose did not cry. She was silent, gripping the clothes of her brother, who hesitated in the vast gulf between man and wife. She was hardly breathing, joining Helen in never looking at me. She clung to my son as he tried to reassure her, keeping the locker within her reach. The dead observed our horrors with fixed stares, their tortured souls adrift and alone.